All right. Hey guys, good morning. It's great to see some familiar faces here. This is awesome. Thanks for being here. A couple just housekeeping items. We're going to go for the full 60 minutes here. We'll keep everybody on mute just for the sake of making it as clear as possible so we can hear everything Zach's talking about. If you do have questions, comments, just throw them in the chat box. I'll monitor that throughout the call. I'm also going to chat in. There's a link. If you have more one-on-one questions for Zach or want to just go deeper on some things, he's been nice enough to volunteer to help us out with that. I put a link in the chat box. You can basically text Zachary to 31996, and they'll just add you to a list so that we can follow up and get you whatever information you need, just to make things as efficient as possible. But do chat in any questions you have throughout the chat today, and we'll get to them as best we can. This is a pleasure for me personally. Zach's being my brother-in-law, it's a great chance to learn from him. And I think, we hear this phrase so often that success leaves clues. And, generally speaking, in our world, that's been true. And, I think we can all agree we're in a bit of uncharted territory right now. And so we, in looking to achieve greater success, need to look for those clues in a lot of other industries. And I thank Noah for reaching out and helping to make this connection, and Zach for sharing his time. And I think this is also a reminder of like those closest to us may have a lot of the answers we need, right? So Zach is my brother-in-law, and yeah, we've never had a lot of these conversations we're going to have today. So who in your life could you reach out to that you already know that could help provide some guidance? Just a little question you got started here today. In terms of Zach's background, we'll probably pick up around, obviously the military piece here to get some perspective there, but is a former Marine serving 2 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. Got both his MBA and his master's from BU following those tours. He's been consulting for Deloitte as well as Fairmount Consulting. Currently working on an AI project in defense that's going to protect all of us. So many interesting perspectives and so many chances to learn and grow. So I'm excited to hear what Zach has to say. Noah's prepared a really exhaustive and intense list of questions to get us kicked off. So I will turn it over to Noah and we'll get started. Any questions you have, please do throw them in the chat box and I'll monitor it throughout the call. So thanks, Zach, and thanks, Noah, for putting this together.
All right, awesome. Well, I thought it was important that we talk a little bit about leadership today, and what better person to talk about leadership in a different industry and taking us through what it's like to really be a leader and lead people through uncharted territory. Because when you go into war, when you're in the military, you're going into situations that nobody's really gone into before. Now, clearly you can prepare for them, but things are going to come up that you just don't know that will come up. So I thought it would be a great topic that we can chat with about the obstacles that are faced, the leadership challenges that are faced around leading in a military wartime situation. So just to kick things off, Zach, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself and, talk about how it relates to your time in the military?
Yeah, great. Well, thanks everybody for joining. Excited to talk to all of you. I even brushed my hair this morning, so I'm trying to, live well in quarantine with all the people on today. So yeah, as Jake said, Jake is my brother-in-law. I've spent a lot of time with him and had some of these discussions, but never, as he said, kind of this thoughtfully. So I was in the Marine Corps. I was a captain when I got out. I served my 2 tours in Iraq and then served a tour in Afghanistan, and then went on to grad school. And now I work in technology for an AI defense company, and I lead the advanced projects group, which is ironic because the whole premise of that group is uncertainty, right? So creativity and uncertainty, creating something from nothing, no rules, no guidelines, anything. So I have sort of inadvertently positioned myself over time, after having worked in a very structured environment in the military and a very structured environment in Deloitte Consulting, into these very nebulous and unstructured environments where you can now try and make a reason from chaos. And I think there are a lot of sort of tricks and ties that can make anybody infinitely more capable in doing that.
Nice. So I think it would be really interesting to start off with the topic about what lessons you learned about leadership in the military.
Sure. So, I mean, you could talk about that for hours, but just to begin with, the first thing I think everybody needs to start with is the understanding that leadership is first and foremost about people. period. It's about human relationships. And if you can start there, I think you can crack a lot of the code, because a lot that flows from that understanding and that acceptance that it's just about people will inform the other decisions you make. So that would go into things like how you present yourself, right? Physically, what you wear, how cleanly, you dress, and the way you speak, the manner in which you physically communicate, be it the volume you speak at, the level of intensity you communicate with, your ability to know when to crack a joke, things like that. You're sort of conducting an orchestra with human beings. That's how I've always thought of it. You're conducting an orchestra with human beings. It's, as an officer in the Marine Corps, it was me in front of a group of maybe 30 to up to 60 other Marines, some of whom had significantly more experience than I did, but understanding who they were and what my responsibility was. And that ultimately this came down to connections between people. And if you can start managing those connections and being sort of eyes wide open about it, you're going to see that you'll go much farther. And you do not need to be the subject matter expert. In fact, being the subject matter expert a lot of times is a dangerous place to be, I think, as a leader. Only some leaders in some unique circumstances will actually truly be the subject matter experts. In fact, I think more often than not, some of the best leaders are not subject matter experts. So, the first biggest roof on this conversation is leadership is fundamentally about people and how you interact with them.
Nice. And I want to dive back into that topic a little bit more later on in the conversation, because I think that's a great topic in and of itself. But you mentioned one thing about mentally and physically being prepared. And I'm always fascinated by the military books I read, the shows on TV that I watch around the military and the Navy SEALs and stuff like that. And I really gain a lot of my energy from the mindset that people in the military have. So I wanted to ask you, how prepared was your team to face the physical and mental exhaustive realities of combat? And, did you replicate those in training to prepare yourself for them?
Yeah. So it's an interesting question. I mean, it depends. I mean, sometimes, so I served 3 tours that all 3 were actually very different experiences. Sometimes I felt like we were more prepared than others. I think also the nature of the world at the time. So I was in from 2006 to 2011, so pretty busy time for those 2 wars. It did take on a little bit of, this is a job, right? So almost like minimizing that it was war. It was just like, this is what I do for a living. And, you kind of get desensitized to it. But I think, in the macro sense, we took it very seriously, obviously. And I think a big part of it for me was making sure people's mindsets were right. And, you talked about mental and physical, right? So for me personally, if I don't feel physically capable to a certain level, I basically hear a voice in my head, and it undermines my mental sort of strength. I need to feel physically, personally, I need to feel physically a certain degree of comfort and strength and endurance to have like the confidence that I need to have that mental state. And that's what a lot of what people talk about in terms of the military, of like the mental and physical. That's why people get up in the morning to work out, to say that they had that first win of the day. And it's really about, how do you hack your sort of mindset? In the military, it's a little bit easier insofar as you can sort of order people to do things. You have a strong community around you that, I don't want to use like shaming you, but like you're not going to be the one unit that doesn't get up in the morning, right? Because that's going to look bad on you. So you have these sort of structures that hold you up. When you get out of the service and you're just zapped in quarantine in the Berkshires, I can sleep in as late as I want. Nobody's going to know, right? But then that's going to sort of weaken me as the day goes on, and I'll sort of hear that voice in the back of my head. So, when we're going into combat, one of the things that the leaders would do to get together is talk about what are the things we need to be doing to keep the team engaged, to keep the morale high. There's obviously, you'd have like learning objectives based off of what the reports were from overseas. What did we see the enemy doing? What habits do we need to build tactically, technically? What new technology do we want to deploy with? And so that was very much like a block and tackle thing. But I think the biggest conversations we would have would be the leaders in a room just talking about the state of their platoons, of, hey, how are you guys doing? Like, where's your head at? and one of the ways you attract this is, are guys going out in town and getting arrested? How are they blowing off steam? Or is there assaults on base? Like these things to be like, how restless is the unit? And this was a big challenge in particular because the op tempo was so high that we would go deploy, come home, you'd be home for 5 months, and then you'd go right back to war. So you never really turned off that mindset, even when you were home, which I'll say, there's downsides to that. But the focus really was a lot around mental and physical, not just well-being and maybe actually, frankly, not as much on well-being as it should have been, but mental and physical engagement with the task in front of you. How do we prepare people to build up the sort of mental calluses and the strength to endure the uncertainty that is inevitable in a combat environment?
Man, so many questions popped into my head from your last statement, but it sounded like you learned a ton of lessons being overseas or during training and all that stuff. So how have the lessons that you learned in the military translated back into your everyday personal and business life, or civilian life, as you might call it?
Yeah. So it's funny, actually, I still think about my time in the service a lot. I think I've learned more now looking back and reflecting on it and some of the things I would have done differently, or just, I was actually, after you guys reached out to me, I was thinking about my time and how much more capable of a leader I would be today than I was then, because I was, in my early 20s, given 30 Marines and sent to Iraq. I mean, that's kind of insane to think about now. I'm 36. I've got some gray hairs and some experience. And the way it's sort of translated for me is understanding in a business environment, in the role that I have, that to start with, I am not successful without my people. I can't do all these tasks. I am not the expert. I need to motivate, inspire. I need to comfort. I need to educate. I need to build the boundaries within which we will sort of engage. I need to unleash creativity to solve problems, right? An example of unleashing creativity. So for example, let's imagine for a second that you're on a patrol, you're on a foot patrol, and that foot patrol stretches over 100 meters, right? 12, 15 people. And you get attacked and everybody's pinned down. And I am pinned down and I am 75 meters away from like the furthest Marine. And I can't get to him. And he's under attack too. That person needs to be able to save themselves. They need to be able to save the platoon. They need to be able to problem solve on their own in support of that element. And if you can't empower people before that moment to problem solve on behalf of the team without you present, you're going to sink the ship. And that's no different than in business. If I'm unreachable because I'm on a plane, I'm in a meeting, I need to empower my people to make decisions in real time. I need to explain to them the things that are really critical that they need to be thinking about if I'm not there. And then I need to trust them to execute that decision. And if they do execute that decision and they perhaps make a decision I wouldn't have made, but they made it against the sort of matrices that I have given them, then I'm not going to get on them at all, right? The world as you saw it at that moment led you to make this decision. If it was the wrong one, I can coach you up. But you used the tools I gave you, and you were empowered to make that decision, and you did it swiftly and thoughtfully. Well, that's all I can care about. And you learn and you move on. That is probably the biggest thing of like pushing that decision-making down, empowering people, mentoring them up. And one of a captain I had who I served under on my third tour, he was only a so-so leader, but he had this phrase that I loved that sticks with me today. He said, and this is very important, I think, in business. He said, you lead people, but you manage tasks. I've always hated the idea that like I'm a manager. I don't manage people. I lead them. I inspire you. I motivate you. I coach you. I manage the task I give you. This is your budget. This is your timeline. This is the thing it can't do. So like build me a box. Don't spend more than $100 on it. I hate the color red, and it's due by the end of the month. After that, if I'm leading you properly, you're inspired to meet those boundaries, to maybe come up with a creative solution that says, well, Zach, the purpose of the box was for you to stand on it so you could reach something on the top shelf. But I actually found that I could do it even less expensive, much stronger, and on time by doing a different shape of getting it to the same output, right? That's leadership. I manage the tasks, but I lead the people. And that to me is the biggest piece that I came away with from the military, and understand that, which is why it all comes back to, at the end of the day, leadership is first and foremost about human beings. It's about human interaction. If you start from there, you can go really far.
Yeah, I think that's a great lesson about decentralized command or decentralized leadership, especially if you're leading a big team or a big company or a big organization. Having that decentralized leadership and that decentralized command and empowering other people to make strategic decisions will allow your organization to get the message out much quicker and through many different channels. And I think that's really a great lesson. So you've been deployed overseas multiple times. So from a high level, what were the strategic objectives of your mission? So like, how did you make sure the core message that you were delivering was clear enough so that even the lowest ranking members of your team could understand it, implement it, so that the whole team could be rowing in the same direction towards that same strategic objective?
No, that's a great question. And before I answer, I would say that if anybody here is a reader, I guess actually in this day and age, you got audiobooks. A great book that kind of talks about this principle was it's the Vince Lombardi. There's a number of Vince Lombardi books. I have to Google and we can find it, or maybe Jake, you can find it and post it in the window. But there's one in particular that's like the definitive Lombardi biography. I actually read it in Afghanistan. And the reason it's so relevant is because the key feature about Vince Lombardi, and I bet the same would be true about like Bill Belichick, for example, is Lombardi was a teacher. And he was actually a teacher before he was a coach. And he identifies as a teacher because it goes directly to that question, Noah, of like lowest common denominator. How do you make sure that everybody understands the mission so that you can live up to the Belichick, do your job? And Lombardi, for example, specifically coached and drew up plays around that principle. If there was a single person who couldn't understand what they were doing, then it was too complicated. So to your question, I served 3 tours with 3 different missions. The first tour was very much about, in Iraq, frankly, finding bad guys and just be getting them off the battlefield, right? It had some highly technical aspects to it. We did a lot of work with special forces. And I had a very diverse group of people working for me. I had men and women. I had a wide range of experience in Iraq. I had a wide range of like geographic backgrounds in the States. But the big thing that we focused on was understanding the mission in terms of not like, why are we in Iraq? Doesn't matter. You signed up. It's easy in the military. You signed a piece of paper, so you're going whether you want to or not. But what is our responsibility to our peers in this environment? If you don't do your job, what is the consequence? And what is the benefit, right? You're saving lives. You are, making the world ostensibly a better place. And how does your piece fit into this? Now, for my tour in Iraq, this was unique because it was a sort of hybrid intel infantry element. So the way that question was answered with my teams that would go outside the wire was very different than the way that question was answered with my analysts who'd be behind computers. And so part of this was about understanding that and sort of communicating 2 messages. One to the group, which is to say, the 2 of you, for example, don't interact on a regular basis, but you are 2 different sides of the same coin. And without either one of you, this doesn't work. So you have to respect the other and you have to engage. The other was, and then discussing what we're trying to accomplish, right? On a daily basis, we're going outside the wire and we're looking for people who are doing X, Y, and Z. And here are examples of success and here are examples of failure and why. The second piece was then segregating them and diving down specifically in their mission. Because my conversation with my team leaders and my teams who go outside the wire and perhaps experience more danger was very different than my discussion with my analysts on the watch floor who were highly technical and were living on computers and, dealing with the CIA and the NSA. So the first piece, again, bringing them together as a team and making them understand we're in this together, and each side requires the other. You can't look down on the other because you don't understand each other. You can't build a wall between the 2 of you. You have to interact. You have to maintain relationships. And then the other piece was, okay, now when we get down into it on a daily basis, when you're in the fight, so to speak, you're in the fight either in your Humvee, in your turret, on foot patrol, or you're in it behind a computer, on a chat, whatever it is, dealing with that data. And then reiterating those messages on a regular basis. I mean, I think people even who I work with today would say that I can be a bit verbose, but it's purposeful for me. I want to convey these messages so often that you are like rolling your eyes and they're ingrained in the back of your head. And it's okay I acknowledge it. I will laugh about it and they will roll their eyes too. But I guarantee you these messages that I constantly bring are tattooed in their heads. I have people now who will cut me off and interrupt me and finish my sentence, which is exactly what I want. It needs to be crystal clear and unambiguous what we're trying to do, and more importantly, why, because the why allows the what to endure when I can't answer the what, right? The intent. If you don't have the intent, then you can't decentralize command. If you don't understand the why, you can't unlock other people's creativities, right? If you just want to execute, do A, but you don't say why do A, you're limiting the capacity of your team, and you're frankly going to demotivate them.
So I heard you say pretty much in every answer to every question you gave was around leadership is about communication and specifically about over communication. And you're communicating with people in all different realms with all different knowledge levels and all different technical languages. So how did you simplify your language to provide clarity to your organization?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, every organization, every culture has their own language. The Marine Corps certainly does. And I would actually add a portion to your question, which is in this day and age, and let's look at us over Zoom, the different mediums you communicate over, right? So Marine Corps is a little bit easier. I was typically with my Marines physically a lot of the time, or we'd be disaggregated, but with radios, and that was it. There was no real conference chat or anything like that. In this day and age, you've got email, you've got Slack, you've got Zoom, you've got phone, you've got text. I mean, there's a million different ways to communicate. And so I think it comes back to one, I am an in-person guy. So for me, I travel a lot for work. I'm based on the East Coast. My headquarters, I have an office in DC. I live in Manhattan. Well, I lived in Manhattan, and our headquarters is in Irvine, California. I spend at least a week or more in California every month minimum, just so I can physically be present with people, because you cannot underestimate the importance of physically being in somebody's space. Body language, like the impact of body language and just like interacting with that person, so that you can develop that common language, so that when you communicate over Slack or text or email, there is a groundwork there. Zoom is a great tool, but one of the things I fight at work a lot to that language piece is somebody just throwing a message away in Slack. I tell my team, if you want to get my attention, do not Slack me. I do not respond to Slack. Not going to happen. I have things I prefer. I like email just because I can sort and go back to and search more easily. But I want to hear your voice. I want to talk to you, and I want to sort of establish those lanes of communication. And then it becomes much easier to your original question of like the language, making sure that language is used and interpreted and delivered the same way. Because as most of us probably know, communication is only a small portion of it's the words, called 15%. Then it's tone, inflection, body language. So I don't want to lose that. If I deliver a sentence and I deliver it monotone, or I deliver it impassioned with a lot of volume, that's a totally different message, right? And those are things that I think are really critical, and people need to be really thoughtful about the message they're trying to deliver and the medium they're using to deliver it. You can inadvertently take the wind out of your own sail by trying to deliver an important message like over Slack. I mean, I have this argument with my bosses all the time because they're super tech guys and they want to use every tech tool. And I am, as much as I work at a tech company, human interaction drives leadership, period. Like, period. It's about people, and people are social creatures, as we're really reinforcing right now in this quarantine age. So the language certainly will be a function of whatever your culture is or whatever industry you work in. The military is a great micro example of this. But more so than the language is the method and the consistency of that method. I would never deliver like a critical piece of information about like a capture effort we're doing over anything. If I can't do it in person, anything where you can't see my face and hear my voice. I'm not going to do it any other way. I'm just going to undermine myself and my message and whatever my language is.
Makes sense. So basically keep it simple. Complexity is the enemy of execution. So the simpler the plan, the simpler an instruction, or the simpler a strategy is to understand, the more we're inclined to act. So obviously the opposite of that is the more complex it is, the more obscure it is, the more suspicion will take over, and less one will be inclined to act. So, I think that's a very interesting lesson. Complexity is the enemy of execution. So a couple questions ago, you talked about motivation. So I want to dive into that a little bit, because when you're in battle, things got crazy. Obviously, we're all in a time right now where things are crazy. We're in uncharted territory. How did you stay mentally strong and focused during all of this?
Yeah, that's a great question. Super relevant for today. So the combat by its very nature is a battle with uncertainty, right? So I don't know where the enemy is. I don't know where that bullet's going. I don't know when it's going to end. The list of things I don't know outstrips the list of things I do know 100 to 1. And really what you're dealing with here is like mindset. And I am certainly not the expert on this. There are a lot of people. You can pick your person: Jocko Willenick, David Goggins, Tony Robbins, who talk about mindset, and they're 100% right. It's all about mindset, which is to say, I think there's two parts to this. One is focus on the moment now, right? Fight the fight that's at your feet. And then two, focus on ruthless prioritization. Ruthless prioritization. So let's start with the first statement. The idea here is fight the fight at your feet. So let me give you a good example. If you're trying to climb a mountain and you're at the base of that mountain, and let's have it like kind of like a rock climbing mountain, whoever that guy was who did that free solo, right? That nuts, by the way. Mm-hmm. And you look up and you're like, oh my God, this is insane. I don't know how I'm ever going to do this. And your palms start sweating and your legs start shaking. And then you go to grab the wall, you're going to fall off. You're just going to fall off. You psyched yourself out. You've created an anxious reflex. Your hands are wet. Your mind is now thinking about 300 moves behind, like past where you're actually going to go. And you just failed your first step. You have to stay focused on the fight that's at your feet. Look right at the first handhold. All right, I can do that. Nail it. Then the second handhold, nail it. Part of the reason for this is, and we'll use this today for like the quarantine environment, is you don't know what step 30 is. It's the fundamental nature of it being uncertain. So you don't know in the gunfight what an hour later is going to look like. You don't know when the quarantine is going to be lifted. And if you continue to focus on what you don't know and trying to mentally manage all the different ways this thing could go, you are going to completely exhaust yourself emotionally, potentially physically. And when it comes back to your Zoom call that you do have 90 minutes later to figure out how do you maintain momentum on a deal you're working on, you are just going to go into that call so much weaker than you would have if you just put your energy into the known thing, which was this capture call that was going to happen in 90 minutes. Now, this is not an easy thing to do because fear pushes you to try and shine a light in those dark corners. But what you really need to be doing is accepting that fear, saying, all right, I hear it, I see it. There's nothing you can do to get rid of it. But taking that energy and saying, well, I'm going to manage for the known right now. And then you can start, as you start clawing through those things, this then comes to the ruthless prioritization. What are the things I need to know to maintain my ability to stay in the fight at my feet? So for example, let's go into like a kind of a combat scenario where you're in a gunfight, and the very first thing I need to know, because it's not usually that apparent, they're not waving a flag at you, is where's the enemy, right? Like, where am I shooting? I know I'm getting shot at. I know it's directionally like this way, but I don't know if it's here. I don't know if it's here. I don't know if it's 100 meters, 500 meters. I need to find the enemy. So my first ruthless prioritization is, where are they? I'm not worrying about air support. I'm not worrying about I'm not even worrying about like my guys necessarily, other than like the initial check, is everybody all right? Because if I can't find the enemy, this whole thing is going to go, this is off, right? And as you start working your way through these prioritizations, you can start to create some certainty. So I think Jocko Willenick actually speaks about this really well. He talks about the way the SEALs train. And one of the reasons they train the way they train is because when they go into combat, they want to have a shared set of understanding or muscle memory of what each other will do in certain situations. And the reason they want to do that is because they want to free their mind to tackle other dynamic problems. So for example, if you're going into a building and that's what you do for a living, is clear buildings as a Navy SEAL or whatever your mission is, I don't want to be worrying about if Noah knows when he's the first guy in, if he's going to go left or right, or how he approaches that problem. I need to know what you're going to do so that I can start to free my mind up to work through the dynamic next challenge that gets thrown my way, right? So the way I've thought about this in Zach's silly Marine brain is, for anybody here who's ever gone skiing before, you even just know what skiing is. You know, you go on a ski run and it's wide open. There's no trees there. You're just skiing, right? If you like it a little more advanced, you go into the tree line and you ski in the trees. And now you've got some trees that you have to go around, right? Makes it a little more complicated. You have to start thinking a little bit more closely to yourself so you don't hit the first tree. And then you get to the second tree and you go around them, right? Well, imagine for a second, all of those trees are moving. How can you make a decision? You have to start locking trees into place so that you can start avoiding them. What Jocko talks about in this sort of ruthless prioritization and training is working with your team so that you know where some of those trees are. Noah, I know you're going to go left no matter what in this scenario. So like that tree is now in place. I know I don't have to worry about it. I can see it and I can move around it. That's what we're trying to do in a combat environment. I want to fight at my feet. And stay present. And then I want to start ruthlessly prioritizing as I climb to the next event. I cannot start thinking about, in the gunfight that I'm in, what I'm going to do 3 days later. You just can't. You're gonna be distracted, and more importantly, you end up just, again, mentally exhausting yourself because the number of things that are uncertain is almost infinite, and you just start basically like burning up your computer capacity in your brain and working your anxiety and your emotional, reserves just down in the process of doing it.
So you talked about going into uncharted territory and essentially leading them in the dark, right? Through areas of high uncertainty, which we're obviously all trying to navigate right now. And the analogy you gave was the skiing and sort of seeing the trees, one tree at a time, just being very, very laser focused and almost tunnel-like focus. And making sure that everybody knows where they need to be and making sure that you're leading them to know where they need to be. So with that, how did you get the buy-in from your team that the direction you're leading them in was actually the right direction? Because, we all know there's nothing like running enthusiastically in the wrong direction, right? So how'd you get the buy-in that you were leading them in the right direction?
Yeah, that's a great question. All right, so we'll go all the way back to the beginning, right? It's about people. Buy-in is about a couple things in my view, and it is critical. I'm very glad that you asked that question. For one thing, it's about being open and vulnerable to a degree, which is to say, you have to communicate and get feedback, right? So this is why being the subject matter expert can be dangerous, because if you're the subject matter expert, you might think you know everything, and maybe you do, and you, as a result, shut people out. You don't hear their opinions, you don't hear their perspectives, and then you're going to start losing buy-in. So as much as you can, creating a shared picture of, hey, does everybody understand what we're doing? Everybody understand why we're doing it? Does anybody have any thoughts? That is a big part of this, and being open about it. So I actually thought like a great way that I worked in developing buy-in in the Marine Corps was, as a young lieutenant, one thing I would do is make it very clear that, like, you guys are the experts. Humility, no ego, right? You're the experts, and I need you to help me lead us through this mission. At the same time, you do need to maintain your position as a leader, which is, for the Marine Corps, I'd be like, look, having said all that, we all understand here that whether we like it or not, the way the military is structured, I'm the officer, which means I own the decision. So if it's the wrong decision, I'm the one who's going to go to Leavenworth, or I'm the one who's going to have to bear the burden of that. So at some point, I'm going to make a decision based off of all your input, and I need you guys to buy in. It's my decision to make, and it's my responsibility to utilize you all as resources to help me make the right decisions. But it's my decision. And we all, and get people that, yep, yes, sir, that's your decision. But they also understand I don't make that decision in a closet without their input, and that I see them and respect them as vital contributors to that decision. So to your point of decentralized, before that discussion about decentralized command, I also don't know everything that's going on. Every one of these people is a resource. What are they seeing in the marketplace? What are they hearing from customers? the more you can engage them in the decision-making process to make them feel like they're contributing to the outcome and the direction, the more buy-in you're going to get. There are also going to be times when they might not like it or agree with it, or even like, and more, this is more in the military, I suppose, still some in corporate world, but you get an order that you're like, this is crazy. It kind of went against the sort of military mindset, but I found it to be very useful, which is to say, guys, yeah, this is nuts. I don't love it, but one of the beautiful things about the military is we don't have to love it. We just have to do it. And I acknowledge it. You're not crazy, because people think they're crazy. Like, am I crazy? I think this is nuts. What does the captain think? What does the boss think? They're like, no, I agree. It's nuts, but sometimes you got to do things you don't want to do. And just the acknowledgement, right? That like, yes, I see what you're seeing. I feel what you're feeling. Doesn't change anything. We still have to execute. That's, again, coming back and engaging human beings and having relationships with people is really big. Also knowing your team as individuals, right? So I need to be able to pull aside Noah after like the mission brief and be like, hey man, how you doing? How you feeling? Anything you heard in there? You looked a little off, or like you ready? You fired up? You have to invest in those relationships. You have to invest in those conversations to establish personal relationships with people so that they believe you care. If you don't care about your people as a leader and their success, they're going to smell it, right? They're going to sense it, and you're going to lower the roof on yourself for buy-in. I think, again, so to come all the way back, be open, be candid, be genuine, and engage them. Make them a part of the decision-making process. Ask them questions. Ask them to educate you. And remember, you don't know everything. You might own the decision, but you don't own all the information. In fact, the person who thinks that they own all the information, this is why the subject matter expert is typically not the best leader. The best leader is the best orchestrator, right? The best conductor is the best leader, not the best musician, right? These are two radically different skill sets. And being able to recognize that and understand how to bring people in, and, you know, Johnny really needs to feel like inspired and motivated and needs like a rah-rah speech, and you know, Mary needs to understand the subtlety of the mission. You need to know your people. And if you actively invest in the human beings and connecting with them, what you'll find is, I actually think, is that not only will you have buy-in, but you'll start coming into rooms when these events or these moments arise, and people are filled with confidence and like, all right, how are we going to do this? Right? They're leaning forward into attacking a solution with you instead of leaning back, waiting for you to coach them along.
Yeah, I think these are really, really good points, because I think a lot of times as leaders, we have to put our egos aside so we can listen to other people's ideas, because clearly we can't be expected to know everything all the time, right? And I think that's a really good point. And we have to listen to the experts. Just because we're leaders doesn't mean that we know all the answers to all the different situations. But I also know that as a leader, you have to step back from the problems, right? So you can assess the whole situation, and military terms, so you can keep your eyes up and out, so you can really see things that other people aren't seeing, right? A lot of times people have their heads down and are looking down, and you as the leader need to be looking up and out and assess the situation, and be able to really make the decisions, which is in the best interest of the strategic mission, right?
Yeah, I think that's a great point to pause on for a second. Like the tactical pause is what they call it in the military. So, chaos is, right, that unknown environment. And so one of the ways you can manage that is, they call it the tactical pause, like take a breath, and have that holistic view of the battlefield, right? Of your business, of, the moment in the market and whatever, checking with other people and be like, okay, what's going on? You need to do that in a gunfight. You need to stop for even a half a second. You're untrained. Your body is telling you to point your rifle and shoot. But the second you do that and you look through your optic, your world goes to be this small. You're looking at the world through a soda straw. The officer, the squad leader, their job, exactly what you just said, Noah, is to be behind the line. You should not be firing your rifle as the commander. You're the conductor. I need to tell you, fire over here. You fire over here. You move here. You need to be conducting these important pieces and knowing how to move and motivate your team and where to put them. And they might be the ones calling out like, hey, sir, we're getting movement on the left flank. I didn't know that. And I need them to feel comfortable and confident to report that information up. Hey, inventory stocks are low in store A. And like, I'm not getting the responsiveness I need. Great. I didn't know that. I need that information to come up so I can respond to that. And people need to feel empowered to communicate it. And they need to feel motivated to communicate. You want them to feel like communicating that information is them being a part of the solution, not like, oh, inventory stocks are low and I should have done something so that when you came, the shelves were full. No. That's not what you want. And having everybody understand exactly what you just said, Noah, of like the leader's job is to have their head above water, right? And to be calm, right? You can be a mess inside and take yourself into the bathroom for a minute and throw some water on your face and catch your breath, but come back out. You're in the moment now. You're fighting the fight that's at your feet, and you are communicating and presenting yourself in such a way as to, spread that message. We're going to be all right. A lot of uncertainty. That's fine. But right now we're in this moment, and we're going to manage this moment. We're going to fight this moment.
So being prepared and leading is about being calm, and you can be calm when you're prepared, when you have a plan. But Mike Tyson once said, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. So how did the military prepare you for the maximum number of scenarios and alternative plans so you could really adapt to any situation that could really just change at any moment? And I guess, how did you clearly explain all these options to the members of your team so that everyone clearly understood all aspects of all the various options?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So the way I would answer that is, there's another phrase, and I do love phrases like that plans are useless, but planning is everything. And the reason that's a very important sort of idea to understand is the exercise of planning exposes you to your tools. So for example, one of the key things you need to understand in a battle environment is, what are my tools? Who is to my left? Who is to my right? What calls can I make in these moments to get help, and understanding how to do it? So for example, I need to know, is there air support? Where are the landing zones if I need to evac a casualty? Where are where's my artillery? Where is my QRF, my quick response force? All these things that I can call on. And then I make a plan, a theoretical plan, best case of like, this is what I think is going to happen. Maybe it happens 30% like I thought it would, but I still know where my tools are. And I still understand how I can use those tools in that moment. And I have started to customize my brain to how to call for help with these things. So in a business environment, it could be, what are the working capital loans that I have that I'm aware of because I'm always like thinking about my working capital? What is my surge capacity because I was planning for, hurricane season? These tools that you've explored and engaged in other plans stay in your toolbox, right? And that's why plans are useless, but planning is everything. I need to understand what things I can reach out to so that when the moment comes and I have to respond dynamically, I might not have a plan written out for that moment, but I do know all the hammers and nails that are in my belt. And I can now think dynamically, if I know my business well, about, well, I could hammer this hammer, I could hammer this nail with this hammer. And as you stop trying to solve all the problems at once, as you start to ruthlessly prioritize, like, let's go back to a military scenario. We're in a fight, and I am trying to find the enemy. So I have now found the enemy, right? And I now see the enemy, and okay, they've got bigger guns than me. Okay, that's a problem. Toolbox, air support. I knew before I left what helicopters were in the sky. I know what channel they're on my radio. I can immediately just get on the radio and be like, bad guys here, kill them. This is what happens when you do planning, which is to say you start to understand the tools that are in your box so that you can rapidly call on them in dynamic environments. It's funny, the idea people have about not wanting to go through the planning process because the likelihood of that event coming to fruition in exactly that way is so low that, well, what's the point? The point is it's a mental exercise. And in the military, you do these things called tactical decision games, TDGs. And it's 100% around testing your brain to start understanding how do you quickly start using all the tools in your toolbox to quickly solve problems. And again, the last thing I would say here is the why. If you can start framing the why, always just in the why are we doing, like, what is the point of this? What am I trying to accomplish? It also helps you ruthlessly prioritize your mission. Like, why do I want to get rid of these guys? It's the bad guys. It's very simple. So I don't die, right? High priority. The why is high priority. If the why, if they were not shooting at me and I saw them and the why on my mission was to deliver medical aid to another unit, I'd be like, I'm going to bypass them. The why on my mission is going to inspire like the type of tools and the way I react. So to your question, the Mike Tyson quote, which I love, I would say plans are useless, but planning is everything. Understand the tools that are in your toolkit. It goes back to what Jake said earlier. Like, you have people around you, you might not realize are resources until you start thinking through how would you deal with certain situations, and running your teams through these experiences to sort of get their creativity flowing so that they start understanding the tools that are at their resources, right? So like the store clerk who understands if something's happening, oh, they can call me, or they can call the other store, or, you know, get the sort of the juices flowing on what levers can we pull in these moments.
Yeah, I think you made some awesome points in there. You talked about plans, you talked about planning, but I also heard you say something that was interesting. I want to make sure that you guys didn't miss this. Even with the plan and even with the planning, you still had to take action, right? You still had to make a decision to do something, because there's nothing worse than indecision. I've always operated under the motto that imperfect action beats a perfect plan every time. And when the situation for you was beyond tense and people are risking their lives, it's not possible to remain paralyzed and not make a decision, right? You have to make a decision. And it's sometimes possible in everyday life to tell yourself that with faced with a lack of information like we're all in right now, concrete facts, or simply just uncertainty, or we're just going to wait to see how things pan out, that's not going to work, right? But in the military, however, you certainly can't do that when lives are at stake. There's a real danger in letting a situation get worse due to a lack of firmness or decisiveness or indecisiveness. So with that said, how did you weigh the risks versus the rewards quickly so that you can make swift decisions and take action?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I mean, the way we would talk about it is indecision is the worst decision. Combat's an extreme case, right? Because it's life or death. So one of the frames that you have in the military that it even comes down to like a legal frame in the way you make decisions is the facts as they appeared at the time, which is to say, people are very afraid sometimes to make decisions because of exactly what you said. No, they don't have all the information. They don't want to make the wrong decision. They don't want to have somebody else look back on their decision and judge it. So in the military, the term, the facts as they appeared at the time, is very important, because that's how you're judged, right? In that moment, given what you understood and what you saw under that pressure, that is a reasonable decision you made, right or wrong, right? Now, this comes back to ruthless prioritization. You have to understand the moment you're in. Sometimes it can be bad to force a decision too soon. Now, in a combat environment where you're shooting each other, that decision is typically forced upon you. You are in ruthless prioritization mode. Get out of that situation, kill the enemy. But you need to also take the tactical pause and be like, well, how much time do I have, right? How much threat am I in as a business or otherwise? Because while indecision is the worst decision, ignorance is worse than anything. If you don't know your moment and you make a decision in a moment of panic, that decision will almost certainly be the worst one. So, what are the facts in that moment? Do you have 6 weeks worth of working capital? Well, then you got a minute, right? You got a minute. Stay in the moment, give yourself some breathing room, get your mind right, and make the decision. Do you have 10 days of working capital, right? Understand your situation so that you can prioritize. This is where it gets a little muddy with the combat analogy, because the typical framework for that is like a gunfight, where like you're on a moment, right? So you have to act. But there are plenty of decisions I made that were framed over a longer period of time. For example, in Afghanistan, trying to convince the farmers not to farm opium and sell it to the Taliban. Well, that's a complicated decision because like they make more money, it's easier to farm, and I'm asking them to replace their crop with a crop that yields 10% of the cash. I had a little bit of time to make this decision though, because they weren't going to plant their fields for like 30 days. So, okay, well, how do we frame this? How do we start putting in decision points? What is the information I need to gather to inform me of like, are they actually already making this decision and I can let them come to the right conclusion without having to actually force it upon them? What are the things I need to be seeing in their actions to tell me that. So you don't want to be indecisive, but you also want to make sure that you don't panic yourself into a decision, because that is also the other side of that razor edge, where you kind of lose your cool and sort of back yourself into a corner.
So I heard you talk a lot today, and I just have two more questions, and I'm going to turn it back over to Jake to wrap it up. But I heard you talk a lot today about planning, about plans, about making decisions, about knowing when to make decisions. Obviously, in order to do all that stuff, you have to be disciplined, right? You have to had made a commitment. So can you talk a little bit about discipline and commitment in the military, and also about discipline and commitment in your personal and business life, and how that's translated to how you're dealing with this situation now?
Yeah. So I'm going to totally steal from Jocko. For any of you who know Jocko, his most famous phrase, I think, is discipline equals freedom, right?
Yeah.
So this comes back to my silly analogy of like locking trees into the ground, right? That frees my brain to be able to think about more dynamic problems. Discipline equals freedom. And I think that's so true. Yeah. Being able to create certainty in an uncertain environment is everything. So, the discipline is about consistency, about repetitive processes, right? My team can count on the fact that I will be there every morning at 05, and like come hell or high water, they know I'll be there, and we are going to go run. That is, to me, like the fundamental premise of discipline. We are going to have that meeting at 8 a.m. and we're going to talk about these topics. And that's a valve, maybe. That's a valve. Like, they know they can report about the troubles they're having at their store. They know there are known things for team members to engage upon, like to engage with leadership. There's known pathways. Discipline is also about my behavior, how I present myself. As a leader, I am not inconsistent in the way I engage or the things I get upset about. People should know, I have a friend who, a dear friend, a couple actually, and he classifies mistakes or situations as oopsies or uh-ohs. You spill a glass of water on the table, that's an oopsie. You crash the car, that's an uh-oh. Understanding where those lines are of like, Zach's not gonna, like, we didn't make our numbers this month, that's an uh-oh. Like I was sick and like forgot to tell him and came into work late. That's an oopsie. The discipline of like who I am as a person and the way they can engage with me and like knowing when they need to be worried and when they don't need to be worried, that is a huge part of this. And that's also a big part of like discipline in the military, of like, what are the things that Captain Shore cares about? And that now as I take on his sort of culture in this platoon, care about. Now, what do we care about? Right? Because what I ultimately want to do in that environment of discipline is, I don't want to discipline my people. I want to create like an environment where we all share the same values and demonstrate the same levels of discipline so that we police each other. In a perfect world, my squad leaders are policing each other. I don't need to go be like, Sergeant so-and-so, you didn't do this. The other two sergeants pull them aside. Like, that's not how we do this here. That's not how we do this here. And here's why. And they're now taking my message forward and they're carrying it in a million different ways. And that's about discipline and consistency. And it's reflected in not just the decisions you make, but in the way you present yourself, the way you communicate, and the actions you take. People are always watching. People are always listening. I mean, Jake has explained this to me myriad of times with my nieces, and I start swearing because I'm a Marine. They hear things that you don't think they hear. The same is true with like your team. And I have a boss too. And I know he said stuff that stuck in my head that if I threw it back on him, he'd be like, I can't believe that's stuck in your head. Like, yeah, it's stuck in my head. So the discipline that comes from being thoughtful about how you behave, the way you structure your time and your team's time, and the values you put forward and constantly echo over and over again.
Yeah. So many amazing lessons that you gave to us. There's so many golden nuggets in here. But I wanted to finish up with one last question, then I'm going to turn it back over to Jake. But, with all of this preparation, with all this mindset, with keeping your mind and body physically prepared, and with all the stuff we talked about today, the reality of the situation is you could get spun up at any time, and you could get a call and say, hey, in a couple hours, you need to be on a plane to Afghanistan, right? So I find, some definitely some parallels between what we're going through now. So my last question to leave you with is, what advice do you give soldiers when they don't know how long they're going to be at war, right? You could be there a couple weeks, you could be there many months. So what advice do you give them when they're being told they're at war, but they don't know how long they're going to be there? Because that's the situation we're in now. We're faced with uncertain times. We don't know how long we're going to be in this situation.
Yep, exactly. Ruthless prioritization. You don't know. For all we know, none of us are fortune tellers. For all we know, 3 weeks from now, some nerd in their basement creates a cure. Not totally probable, but like maybe. I mean, crazy things have happened. None of us would have predicted this moment. So this is the thing, again, about torturing yourself by fighting tomorrow's fight. It's unknown. So trying to know it only exhausts you. It's a waste of energy and a waste of time. A better use of your time and your energy is to accept the moment you're in, fight the fight at your feet. What do we need to be doing right now? Preparing a little bit. Plans are useless. Planning is everything. If this goes on 6 months, what are the things I need to start thinking about in the next week? And then I'll think about them in the next week. I'm not going to think about them right now. Because if you over-index on battling the unknown, you lose complete sight of what's happening today. So to my Marines, right? You ultimately know roughly when you're going to go home. But the other version of this is you don't know if you're going to die, to be totally blunt about it. You don't know. You just don't know what's going to happen when you go outside the wire. So when you leave to go on patrol, control for the things you can control for. Do I have all my ammo? Are my radios working? Do my batteries work? Do I have a good plan for CASEVAC? Do I understand what aircraft are on station in F5 artillery? Do I understand where my QRF is? Have I controlled for all the things I can control for? Yes. Am I confident in that? Yes. All right, let's go. Let's go. And if something happens, we'll deal with it. But I can't start losing my mind about trying to figure out the infinite permutations of things that might or might not happen. If I could do that, I would play the lottery and pick stocks and have like 9,000 boats and be smoking cigars out of both sides of my mouth. But like the world doesn't work that way. And so it's this is a mental exercise that we need to purposefully engage in every day. You have to wake up in the morning, feel those thoughts, feel that fear, feel that anxiety, acknowledge it, and then thoughtfully bring yourself back to today. I would wake up in Afghanistan sometimes just terrified, be like, this is crazy. This is my third tour. What is going on? I can't do this anymore. All right, I had my moment. I smoked my breakfast cigarette. I came back down to earth, and I got back to the mission of today, which is we're going to hit this patrol. I'm going to go check in the COC. I'm going to get my batteries charged, and we're going to go do it. And if something happens, I'll deal with it. But I'm not going to rev my engine about a thing I can't control. And it's a hard lesson to learn. It is a conscious decision you have to constantly make to bring yourself back to center. Because if you are in charge, everybody else is looking at you to say, well, do I need to worry about tomorrow? Because if Noah's pretty comfortable and he feels under control, like I'm going to be calm. Like, okay, the boss has got it. Like I'm nervous, but like I trust this person because we have a good relationship. So like I'm going to stay present as well. But if you start panicking and over-indexing on tomorrow, then you're going to lose sight of the storefront today.
Yeah, so true.
That's the only way you can do it.
So true. Stop worrying about the past. Yesterday is over. Right? Stop focusing on the future because it's not something you can control. Focus on the thing you can control and just focus on the now and be present in the now. And most importantly, enjoy the journey. Make sure to smile.
Enjoy the journey. That's right. You'll turn around. You'll be shocked at what you accomplished. And this is a wartime mindset, right? We are in a wartime moment. So like this truly ruthless prioritization and like staying hyper present, you get some of the luxury of depth and decision-making back in a more normal environment. And this is not necessarily the way you need to be every day, right? You do need to start thinking about your one-year revenue planning and things like that in a normal environment. Right now, we're in survival mode. We are in survival mode. You're at an operating base in the middle of Afghanistan, surrounded by IEDs and the Taliban. You are in survival mode. Go outside the wire, understand what your tools are, understand where your risk is, and fight today's fight. Don't worry about what the fight is going to look like in a week. Don't worry about it. For all you know, in a week, you get reinforced, and now, like, the battle is completely changed. Oh, no. So you have to stay focused on the fight at your feet.
So awesome, man. Listen, I'm going to go back and I'm going to watch this interview again because there's so many great lessons learned here. I want to make sure that I soak it all in and take good notes when I, can have a chance to really just focus on the message here. So thanks so much for doing this today. I'm going to flip it back over to Jake to wrap it up. And and then we'll let you guys get back and take some action.
Yeah, I know we're at time. I'll make it super quick. Zach, thanks again for spending your time with us. Everyone, you guys now all know what my Thanksgiving dinners sound like. Basically, essentially what it is. But no, in all sincerity, really appreciate what you shared. I chatted up Zach's LinkedIn profile if you guys want to connect with him there. There's also a text code if you don't want to type your email in the box here. It'll basically give your email address to Zach, and you guys can further communicate and strategize. But I do think the most valuable thing I'm taking away is reconsidering like the actual battle that's at our feet, right? For some of us, it may be health related. For others, it may be reserves, which we can address with cutting expenses. For others, it may be lack of pipeline in our business. Figuring out, separate the media battle from our personal battles and figuring out what's actually the battle we're fighting. So thanks everybody for tuning in. Zach, thanks again. And Noah, thanks for coordinating this. Everybody have a great day, and we'll post the recording up on Facebook.
Yep.
And if we'll leave the Zoom open for another minute. If you want to type in your email address, we can also send you a direct copy if you want afterwards too. So you can just chat in your email address if you want a copy.
Sounds good, guys.
Sure.
Have a great day, everybody.